Generally, I put my little post-game shower thoughts into the ends of the main videos, but this one is kind of long and quite abstracted, so I figured I'd pull it out, which coincidentally is why I'm a father, and go over it in a little side video. I've been replaying the Soulsborne games, obviously, and the PS3 era really hasn't felt like it's aged today. Don't get me wrong, it's of another time for sure, so there's an adjustment period to it, but it's doing something different from all the modern games, and as such, they all feel like an endpoint of an era and a concept. They have a slow-paced, mechanically simple design to them, where enemies only have a few moves, long punish windows, and you're not required to counter them in overly specific ways. As long as you time your dodge, the direction doesn't really matter, or as long as you monitor your stamina, you can block basically everything without worrying about being bursted through in one comboed. You don't have fancy movesets to access, you hit them with a quick or a heavy, it's all very methodical. There aren't really that many later Souls-like which have kept in line with this. There's the first Surge game, I guess Crab Souls as well. I never played the Lords of the Fallen games, but they seem to be going for the same tempo. None of these are huge names in the style to start with, but when you look at the wider market of the genre, heavy hitters tend to be of the faster, more complicated ilk. Neo, Lies of P, Elden Ring, they're all much more intricate, in-depth, high-tempo titles. And this is what I mean by them not really aging. Nothing has really one-upped them in the same lane. If you look at GTA 3 and put it next to San Andreas, it's smaller, half the vehicle types are missing, the lock-on is dodgy, well, dodgy-er. You can't jump out of moving cars, the protagonist is a mute and so on. It's a title which is being outdone by direct successes. It feels like an early version of things that would be tidied up later. It's a starting point rather than an end one. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy it more than the follow-ups or anything. I massively prefer Gen 1 Pokemon to all the follow-ups because I don't enjoy all the clock manipulation, berry crap, and increased story-focused stuff. I like that it's primitive, I'm just noting that it definitely feels older. Bloodborne has given me a lot more of those vibes than any of the three that preceded it. Ironically enough, this is due to it feeling a lot more modern. Bloodborne is the first fast Souls game, and in a lot of ways, that firstness comes through quite a bit. As I just said, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I said in the last video that Bloodborne is my favourite game ever, and it may very well still be. It still does a lot of things that nothing else can compare with. The theming and atmosphere is impeccable, the level design is supremely high quality, the sheer childlike glee of cathartic, high-definition ultraviolence is transcendental, but there are a lot of areas which other games have attempted to cover and one-up. No one has really ever tried to one-up Dark Souls 1 on its own turf. The first of these areas is one which I think is at least easy to argue, so it shouldn't get as much pushback. RPG simplicity. Bloodborne is a stunningly simple game. There are 6 stats. There's no death mechanic beyond corpse running. All gear is basically the same. There's no equip load to manage. Almost all weapons are uniquely representative of entire classes, all of which are capable of easily beating the game, with none that are clear obsolete early versions. Guns are totally effective as parry bombs even with base stats. There's really only one magic stat, and there's practically no support magic. And it doesn't show up until you're already way down the physical damage rabbit hole. Buffs are handled mostly through consumables. In all honesty, the RPG elements are probably lighter than what is in the new God of War games. In this most recent run, where I did my post-Amelia mad dash for the pizza cutter, it dawned on me that my build was done at that point. Like, I would not have to change a single part of my kit for the entire rest of the run. I'd only used health, stamina, and strength, and that is all I would ever need to invest in. I had 2 weapons which suited a strength build, which could handle beast and holy opponents as needed. Any of my armor set choices were already fully cosmetic. My starter gun parried exactly as well as anything else. I'd only ever be buffing with paper. Sure, another 70 points into those 3 stats and some more gem drops would make the numbers go up, but I wouldn't be swapping anything relating to how I play for the rest of the game. She's the second story boss of the game. I was level 44. Compare that to my Dark Souls 2 run, where I did get my whole game weapon very early, but I was always developing my character. I could have gotten the Germax in the second level of the playthrough, but I needed 36 strength to two-hand it, and 50 to one-handed it. I then needed enough stamina to swing it more than once. It weighed so much that it wore see-through armor until the end of the base game. I needed to invest in some adaptability to be able to dodge with it, and I realized I could get 50 free magic damage if I spent some points on magic and attunement. Through the entire game, I was working towards breakpoints of progress and swapping out gear despite having my weapon locked in from right near the start. In Dark Souls 1, I lamented that I got the Black Knight sword drop right at the start, because it was twice as powerful and easy to upgrade as anything else, and would remain the most powerful option I had through the entire game. Obviously, it's balanced around being a 20% drop, but it was a progression dead zone. It couldn't be buffed, so there was no need to invest in anything aside from health and damage from that point, and it ruined that aspect of the game for me. I could argue I'd still need to work on equip load for armor progression, but DS1 paired equip load with stamina, so that happens anyway. Obviously, it's made worse there because it's honestly a garbage weapon that just happens to have 100 more AR than it should. It's a slow, short, basic greatsword with R2s that are too slow to ever actually use, so it's boring. Well, at least every Bloodborne weapon is going to be the most fun torrent of joyous violence you've ever seen. But despite that saving grace, it must be said that everything in Bloodborne is a Black Knight sword in regards to progression gating, particularly when the upgrade material scarcity is factored in. To put it in context, in the old days, I made a level 32 Burial Blade twink for co-oping an Amelia, and that character was, raw numbers aside, a complete character. I had the armor I'd use, I had the pistol that could parry as well as anything else, I had the stats to wield the weapon, and enough health to survive a couple of hits. If I kept using the character all the way up to level 132, I wouldn't add a single thing to its loadout. I'd just boost the survivability and damage output a whole bunch. The character and playstyle would be the exact same. In Elden Ring, I made a level 26 dual bleed twin blades twink for Margit. And while it was really fun jet-setting around the map completing all the required steps I needed to build it, it was not a remotely well-rounded character and kinda sucked against anything I couldn't just blend. At level 126, it'd have completely different gear, it triggered bleed twice as often, dramatically impacting how I'd play it, and it'd have support magic and extra options available to give it more viability and options. Basically, kinda everything else in the fast soul space has dramatically more going on in that front. Obviously, the phenomenal Neo stands out as the poster boy for all of this additional gear management complexity, but even things as condensed down as the Surge or Wukong find time to fit in a lot more gear movement and build craft. It's not to say this is an inherently bad thing. There's a satisfaction that comes from having a low-level character that feels complete, but it absolutely feels incredibly primitive. The second argument I want to put forward here is a lot more contentious. Indeed, up until this most recent playthrough, I considered it a complete boon. Chaos and Spectacle is hiding mechanical gameplay simplicity. I don't play these games for difficulty. Obviously, the challenge is part of the appeal that makes the mechanics enjoyable. Dodging attacks that take 4 seconds to come out in fights that only last 2 minutes wouldn't be very exciting if the punishment for failure wasn't so severe, but I'm not seeking mastery. You've seen the clips that I've put up here, I'm sloppy as hell. I want to get by with a moderately passable 6 out of 10 performance, and feel like a total badass if I happen to be operating at an 8. A tiny handful of encounters aside, Bloodborne asks you for around a 3. This is why I like the older ones so much. The enemies have like 8 moves at most, and you really only need to understand about half of them to get through most fights. And that understanding is generally not very specific in solution, mostly just timing or knowing what's worth blocking. You've got to learn a bit, but not absolutely everything about the fight. This is why I'm not going to cover Sekiro when I'm up to it. In that, it feels like I've got to be able to read and react to everything in specific ways or I lose, and I don't find that kind of hard grading even remotely fun. I'm not overly interested in beating it, it's not for me. Bloodborne, on the other hand, goes the other way and hides it with spectacle and chaos. Bloodborne bosses are wild, hectically animated, frenzied storms of flailing limbs and gore, and you kinda don't have to learn anything. Like, I have a strategy that I apply, so it's not quite just walk up and face tank, but it's not specialized for individual foes or moves. I don't read or understand really anything coming my way, it's just chaos that I just do my thing around. Here is my all-conquering strategy for anything that can't be parried. 10 o'clock. That's it. No matter what I'm against, I try to move to 10 o'clock. If I see the monster doing any kind of move whatsoever, I dodge forward and left, and if I don't get hit, I mash R1. If I did get hit and it didn't do much damage, I mash R1. If I did get hit and it did do decent damage, I pop a heal, and then I mash R1. There's a lot of stuff happening, but none of it really matters. Other than backing off the odd AoE, there's really no need to consider what any move specifically is. If you're at 10 o'clock, it's probably just gonna miss. I've killed him like 8 times over the years, and I still don't know a single move that the current base does. I was so confident on Amelia that I devoted an entire character to just killing her over and over again with randoms. The only thing I learned specifically was her opening swing. Even more theoretically thought-based encounters like the Shadows of Yharnam are largely just frenzied rushdowns, since there's too much crap coming at you from off screen to approach them sensibly beyond the first phase. I watched the goddamn Taurus demon more than basically anything in Bloodborne. And in the past, there was nothing wrong with this, because Bloodborne feels and looks incredible. It's a spectacle, not a skill check. And when it inherently feels as good as this does to just smack things up, it doesn't really matter that it's barely offering more gameplay than a Musou game. Did I think? No. Did I have fun? Hell yeah. The lizard brain takes over. The lizard brain relishes the hunt. But, It's been 11 years now, and other stuff can feel pretty damn cathartic now as well, and can do it without being entirely just visual chaos. Neo is a torrent of numbers, stack combos, and moveset quirks. It may not look as good as Bloodborne, but the tempo and spectacle is still very high despite the player-side expression being dramatically enhanced. Elden Ring and Dark Souls 3 ramp up the cartoonish, heroic lunacy of the spectacle moves while actually demanding that you learn how to handle and play them properly. Sekiro, Wolong, and Surge 2 turn the simple parry into dramatic, fight-defining centerpieces. Again, I'm not saying this is inherently bad. A few of the games mentioned there do go so far that I stop having fun, and I'd rather have dumb fun than smart not fun. But it is an inherently stripped back and basic combat system compared to its contemporaries, and its spectacle is no longer unique to itself. They may have done it best on the first attempt, but it does feel like a first attempt. My final point is linked quite heavily to the last topic. Bloodborne doesn't revisit well. Not replay. If you play it again shortly after a first playthrough, it'll be easy, sure, but the sensation of overcoming will still be there, so beasting the game through improved knowledge will still be fun. But coming back to it after a long layoff, it's comfortably the least fresh on return. Don't get me wrong, if you've never played it, fire it up. You'll have an amazing time getting the hang of the intensity of the game overall first time through. That's not impacted. But if you've done it before, that magic isn't recaptured fully. The boss design is a big part of that for sure. With a long layoff, specific memories can fade a bit, so even stuff you kinda know can still require a little bit of relearning. I knew the gist of what Alant, Artorias, or Smelter Demon could dig up on those replays, but I still had to relearn the exact timings and spacings. Some revisits were actually more fun than in the past, because the demoralizing get completely wiped phase of learning wasn't there. I just had the really fun get in the groove portion of learning. Bloodborne doesn't have a groove. Bloodborne doesn't have specifics. I remembered the lesson of being insanely aggressive and sitting right next to stuff, and that's enough to absolutely body almost the entire game. It didn't matter that I didn't remember exactly how long combos were, or how long each swing got held, because I was bypassing it entirely. There's a lot of fun in learning to internalize that degree of berserker aggression, but you're not going to forget that lesson, and it supersedes all other lessons. It's kind of like how Quelaag isn't really holding up all that well over the years. I remember when people used to discuss methods of cheesing her, where to find safe spots around the level and whatnot, because people weren't confident with the concept of getting so close that all of her direct attacks miss. Nowadays, the advice is just punch her in the face, don't let anything stop you. Bloodborne is full of Quelaags. Admittedly, much more exhilarating Quelaags, but Quelaags nonetheless. Without the memory of overcoming the initial awe of how intense the bosses are when you're just standing daftly in front of them being really fresh, not much that you run into is really going to hold up. But this topic is separate from the second one because it's not just bosses that cause this. There's also the gear economy. There are very few weapons to choose from until the endgame, and the upgrade economy is insanely stingy. In my various playthroughs over the years, not including runs where I've used online glyphs to dungeon dive early, I've played up to the endgame with the Hunter Axe, the Saw Spear, the Rifle Spear, the Ludwig's Holy Blade, and the Pizza Cutter. Obviously, it is possible to danger sprint through the early DLCs for a couple more options, but for an average playthrough, I'd basically run through all the options available. There's the Kirkhammer, the Cane, and I guess the Tonitrus if its durability can even handle it. But really, I can't think of many main weapon options I could choose to experiment with if I played again. In everything else, I could replay them all a dozen more times and have completely different weapon and build choices from the early game alone. In that Dark Souls run where I complained about getting the nuke sword, I still used 7 weapons across the playthrough for at least a level each. There are more weapons in the starting classes in most of these games than there are in the first 2/3 of Bloodborne. It does open up in the last 5 levels, including the DLC, but until then you're probably going to wind up playing with something you've already used. Nearly all of these base game weapons are also just straight quality or physical weapons also, so if I did decide to build around one of the later elemental weapons, there's really bugger all in the way of temporary stopgaps while you wait to unlock them. And that's only if we're pretending that elemental options aren't completely shot anyway. There just aren't enough gems to make most build options viable without using chalice glyphs. I tried to use the Cos Parasite for my New Game Plus splash footage at the start of the last video, and I literally could not put an arcane gem in all of its slots, and one of those slots was under 10%. I had beaten the entire game and was up to the last static chalice. The options just aren't there. Even if there were more options, the game is such a Scrooge with upgrade materials that switch around is very difficult. Scaling is kind of huge in Bloodborne, so any additional levels gained on a weapon are very noticeable. And basically until the point any new tier of upgrade material is easily farmable or purchasable, you're only going to find enough in the levels to have one weapon up at that tier. I intentionally played up to Amelia with an under-upgraded weapon because I knew that I wanted to use the pizza cutter. But if I had have just used what I had, it would have been another area or two before I would have been able to actually use it without farming the Yaha Ghoul Bagman like 20 times. This gets worse with chunks, where I got my first ones in the Nightmare Frontier, but only enough to get up to a +7. I got enough by the end of Yaha Ghoul to get it up to a +9, a couple of zones later, but I still didn't have enough to get a second one up to that level until I got all the way into Canehurst, right at the very, very end of the game once they were farmable, admittedly at a horrible, horrible rate. I basically couldn't experiment with multiple weapons until post-game, even if I had access to more of the cool things that I hadn't used yet. It's just not a good game to mess around with or experiment with in regards to gear. The pizza cutter is obviously one of the most fun things ever conceived, but I couldn't play around with anything else once I committed to it at all come mid-game without halving my damage output, despite all my stats being well suited for almost everything available. I ended the playthrough with a spare blood rock and another 2 worth of insight that I couldn't use because I didn't have enough chunks to get more weapons up there. So that's basically the crux of my thoughts here. I still love the game, and the sheer joy it can create is unparalleled. I just wanted to highlight a curious way that it's shifting into the nostalgia piece phase of its legacy compared to what came before it, at least for me. I don't think it's going into the classic phase anywhere near as gracefully as any of the titles before it, despite the pace, gameplay, and visuals being far more accessible for a modern audience. It might still be a better game than them, but it's not as effortlessly timeless. I guess, in the end, the main thing I really want to say is, of course, give us Bloodborne 2 already, you hacks.